CMON, or CMON, or however you want to pronounce that, I've always pronounced it CMON, has sold Zombicide to Asmodee. But wait, doesn't include all of Zombicide. It doesn't include Marvel Zombies and doesn't include Deceased, which is, I mean, it can't, I don't think, because you can't transfer a license. And CMON, or CMON, or whatever, doesn't own Marvel or DC. So I'm pretty sure that's why Asmodee can't acquire those games, because they themselves have to negotiate a license separately with those companies, and the license that CMON is using does not transfer, and therefore they couldn't give them those games. And I find that interesting that Asmodee is doing this. I don't know how much they paid for it, but I don't know how valuable Zombicide really is, because I'm not really sure that while it's great and it's a big hit on Kickstarter, I mean, I don't think Kickstarter is really the board game market. I think that most YouTubers now are just, or at least the biggest YouTubers are, always talking about Kickstarters, but I don't think the general public who buy board games, and even the real hardcore board gamers, I don't know how much they are connected to Kickstarter. And I think a lot of them, especially after what happened after the pandemic, with a lot of companies, including CMON, increasing their costs and then making people pay more money afterwards. Obviously, Mythic was the worst for that. Well, actually, maybe there were probably worse ones that did that. Board games themselves aren't that scammy on Kickstarter, not in the way that video games are, but they can be, and they certainly were more so after the pandemic. And I think that put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth. And I haven't seen any numbers for Kickstarter, but I don't know. It's got to be down, or at least its growth was slowed by this. But to get back to the Asmodee thing, I don't know how valuable Zombicide really is, and whether or not it's worth acquiring, because, I mean, I don't see it being that significant at retail. But then it's Asmodee, so if anyone could make it viable at retail and therefore more of a household name, then it's probably Asmodee, so maybe that's what they see in it. And of course, CMON needs the money because they're having issues, because tariffs are eating into their margins, if not causing their costs to exceed their sales numbers. So without finding another revenue source in the short term, the company might not survive. That's probably the drive for this deal. So I guess both of them find what they need out of this. But I don't know. I mean, a lot of people... Okay, maybe I haven't actually seen anyone excited about this. They are intrigued by this. They are... they're not confused. They know that CMON was having issues. But I think that Asmodee is purchasing it might be confusing people like it is me, because I don't necessarily see it as that valuable. And I guess there are people that, they know Asmodee and it acquires things. And during this turbulent period is a period when Asmodee will start acquiring more things. And a lot of people are concerned that Asmodee controls too much of the market already, and acquiring things is going to cause even more of an issue. So I guess that is the main reason for people discussing this, and could also just be a slow news day. There's not much to talk about in board games, and Asmodee buying Zombicide, which I guess, if I was to think of right now the most talked about board game for the past 2 years, could very well be Zombicide. So I guess if your entire company's existence is in that space, then acquiring the one that has the most attention at this time is probably a good move. But I think that the board game industry itself is in kind of a slump. So whether or not the most discussed or the most talked about, the most, I guess, exciting board game doesn't mean much when board games aren't really moving like they used to, and it's going to be even worse when the prices go way up because of tariffs, unless a deal aside, and then the tariffs have little effect on the game industry, but even then we're still in a slump. And so does the game that drives the most eyeballs to Kickstarter, the board game, I think that they've had the largest Kickstarters and the quickest 24-hour pledges and that kind of stuff. I mean, if that's happening in a downturn, what does it really mean? Like, does it mean that when things are hot again in the tabletop gaming market, in board games, if they are ever again, does that mean that Zombicide itself will still be at that level, just extrapolated to now when things are going really well and board games are flying off the shelves? Or is this just the thing that people talk about right now because there's little else to talk about? I don't really know the answers to these questions. I'm just kind of thinking about whether or not Zombicide is worth acquiring, and I guess we won't really know until 1 year, 2 years down the road. And now Zombicide also is expensive to produce if you're producing it in China and there are tariffs. I think that you could probably produce it in the States, as long as you're producing it at scale, and you can get molds and tool and die stuff in the States to produce the massive amount of minis that Zombicide traditionally comes with. And you might even be able to improve the quality on it, or at least maybe the design will be more localized to sensibilities within certain regions. I don't know. It's that's the problem, is that it's a miniatures game, and I'm not sure how much depth there is to the game, other than you get a lot and it's a ton of minis, and this is what excites people because they like having physical things, and other people like to have lots of stuff to paint. And this is why Warhammer does quite well. While Warhammer may not be the best game ever, the fact that the minis are so great, and the assembly of them and the painting of them and the making them of your own and the lore are great. They kind of raise up the quality of the game because you're so immersed in it. And so maybe Asmodee can compete with Games Workshop through Zombicide. Although I think that I guess Asmodee has tried to compete with Games Workshop by making their own things, and that hasn't done as well as they would have hoped. So maybe they're thinking they need Zombicide to do that. But I think that maybe they just I think that they want to take shortcuts. I think that a lot of the games that they've put out that are minis based or wargaming based and stuff like that, I think they're being lazy about it. And I think that acquiring Zombicide is another lazy move. That's just from an outsider looking in. I don't actually know, because I don't play a lot of war games, and I don't do a lot of mini stuff. So I might be wrong about that, but it just seems to me that they're not innovating with these things, and they're not being dynamic with these minis games that they've themselves have put out. And I don't think Zombicide is that either. And just acquiring it doesn't mean that you can make it compete with Warhammer. I think that if you want to, you need to have people that are designing it that are in love with that kind of thing and create wonderful lore and have great writing and also great designers, artists, that kind of stuff. So unless they do that, I don't think that their acquisition will mean much. But let me know what you think below.